For our first panel today, we have Aaron Neo, the Director of Plug and Play Indonesia, who would be helping to moderate the panel discussion on changes and opportunities in Asia in the time of COVID-19.
Thank you, Tanya. Hi, everyone. Very excited to be here to be moderating this group of very distinguished guests today. We're going to be giving you guys an overview of the macro, social, and economic impact COVID-19 has had in Asia, with a focus on the Indian ecosystem. I think Jojo, Philip, and Said already echoed this. In times as uncertain as today, it's really important to share as much relevant knowledge as possible so that we all have the tools necessary to make informed decisions quickly. Before we do get into the questions though, I'll be doing a round of very brief introductions about the panelists so that you guys do know them a little better and to help contextualize their answers later on. First, we have Mrs. Christine Romano, Managing Partner of McKinsey Philippines. Christine was actually the first Filipino partner elected in the firm globally. Her expertise lies in financial services, digital transformation, economic development, and matters related to the public sector. Next, we have Mr. Jung Yu-shin, who is the Dean of the Management of Technology School at Songhang University and also chairman of the Korean Fintech Center. He's a fintech industry leader who provides advice to both governmental bodies and also the financial services industry. Prior to this, Mr. Jung was CEO of a Korean venture investment firm and CEO of Standard Chartered Securities. And last but not least, we have Mr. Edwin Chow, Assistant CEO, Innovation Enterprise of Enterprise Singapore. Edwin works to ensure that Singapore becomes a center of market-led innovation projects targeting the international markets. The objective of Edwin is to build a strong base of Singaporean startups, SMEs, and larger companies developing and commercializing new products and solutions. Welcome, guys. Thank you again for taking the time to be with us here today. Let's jump right into it, I think. First, I did want to talk about the restrictions and how it has affected your respective countries. I think all three countries that you guys are in have implemented some form of restrictions with varying degrees of intensity. So I just wanted to ask you guys how these restrictions have affected you and your community. Christine?
Sure. Thank you very much, Aaron. So we actually have been tracking various restrictions, in fact, of course, in the Philippines, but also globally. And it has been quite interesting that in many emerging markets, actually, quite restrictive lockdowns have been imposed, primarily because the healthcare system, is not as equipped to handle this pandemic. And therefore, it's been a very blunt instrument to just say, we don't have enough hospital beds, we don't have enough ICUs, so why don't we just, let everybody stay in their home? So just to share an example, in the Philippines, since March 14, so it's been over several weeks now, everyone in the main capital as well as in the main island have been on strict stay at home, where we have not been able to leave except to do essential services. And I know that that's quite similar. Later, Edwin might speak about the circuit breaker in Singapore. And I think more and more countries have actually adopted rather stringent rules. And it does actually take a toll. On one hand, of course, it has a positive effect on health outcomes, right? Because it does slow down the spread of the virus, which is very good. That is the objective of these stay-at-home orders. But inevitably, it does also impact the economy. So Jojo talked about the broader economic impact. And actually, it's really been evolving over the last couple of weeks. But, the headline for us is across the world, this is an economic crisis that we have not seen since World War II. Right, so globally we are seeing, growth rates of up to negative 7%. Right, from a 2 to 3% consistent growth over the last few years and decades, we're going to go negative for the first time in people call it a once-in-a-century pandemic, and that is certainly true. In the Philippines, I can speak for the economic impact. In the first quarter alone, where there's only really 2 weeks at that point in time of a lockdown, our growth went from 6% to negative 0.2%. So imagine that. And we weren't even on full lockdown during this period. So many are actually anticipating the second quarter to be worse.
Okay, thank you, Christine, for sharing that. Edwin, I think Christine mentioned the circuit breaker. How has that impacted you and your community in Singapore?
Yes, thanks, Aaron, Christine. Good morning to everyone from Singapore. Pretty grey, overcast day here. Probably mirrors the mood of many people in Singapore today. The lockdown, or I shouldn't call it a lockdown, it's a circuit breaker, as our Prime Minister says, was instituted over a month ago, 7th of April, right? Primarily to minimize movement, travel of individuals, and like many other countries around the world, to prevent the spread of the disease, to prevent people from falling sick, especially the elderly and the more vulnerable. To the extent that we have brought down the community spread of the virus, the number of infected cases in the community has gone down. That is beginning to show some success. We still have a sizable number of cases in some of the dorms which house the migrant workers. We will continue to sort of test those and make sure we take care of them. But overall, in terms of restrictions, the impact on startups has been the same as any other companies, to be honest. So if you are in a consumer space, your business has pretty much disappeared overnight. If you are in the aviation, hospitality industry, or if you are enterprise software supporting aviation and hospitality, the situation is quite dire. Having said that, I think there are also some bright spots. I think we are beginning to see, or we have seen, startups active in the biomedical space. People, companies like Miraxis that are developing diagnostic kits, BioFoundry that's developed clever ways of shielding frontline workers that are doing the testing using just a simple plastic kit. These companies are seeing an increase in interest, both in terms of increasing revenue as well as investor interest. But overall, I think it's fair to say the economic impact has been quite dire. There's some bright spots. I read a report earlier today. The GDP forecast for this year for Singapore alone, at least the official forecast, is -1% to -4%. If you consider it was about 2% growth last year, that's a pretty steep drop. Unemployment so far has been still sort of under control, partly because of a lot of the interventions that the government has introduced. I can talk about that later. But I want to end on a slightly positive note. If we look at the export figures, right, the non-oil domestic exports for the last month, surprisingly, it has held up. So it's actually growing. And we think it's primarily because of the pharmaceutical industry that makes up about 20% of our manufacturing output here. That one is running on full steam. So I want to present a realistic picture. Yes, we are affected, but I think in this dark clouds, there's still some silver linings.
Thank you, Edwin. I really like how you put it, realistic picture with a silver lining. Mr. Jung, I think Philip did mention earlier with Fireside with Saeed and the mayor of Seoul. I think Korea is doing better than other countries. So what has it been like in your community, and how has the restrictions impacted? And is there, with the better progress, has there been changes in the impact?
Yushin from Seoul. Hi, everybody. South Korea government, like other countries, implemented the aggressive social distance campaign against the COVID-19 from March. As before, co-founder of Plug and Play, Jojo, stated, South Korea has been relatively successful at controlling COVID-19 with the help of good medical care system and some innovative idea like a drive-through test method to check the COVID-19 infection for people in a car, and a phone virus test by using information and got from base station a mobile phone, which is making the testing 7 times quicker. But even though we are doing, but because most of people do not go outside, it has started to give a serious downside impact, like a sharp drop in consumption, falling growing growth rate. For example, in the first quarter, the growth rate in Korea is minus 0.1 percentage, and decreasing employment rate. Particularly in the employment rate, the Korean government is now very worried about. But Korea has a strong point in IT and internet, and has a good online delivery system. So even though we recommend our people working at home by turn, we could connect with people on internet. And also we are working in office. We every day check our temperature and use hand disinfection. Particularly, many people share some information. Ventilating air is opening door and the window is pretty important to reduce possible high concentration of COVID-19. And because we have a good online delivery system, many people use the order for meal or order for product instead of using going outside.
Thank you, Mr. Jung. I think across the board, no matter where we are in terms of fighting this virus, the commonality here is that we're all seeing reduced economic activity. I think since we talk about the macro, I wanted to focus in on your particular organization and what strategies you guys are using to combat this reduced social and economic activity. Christine, is this McKinsey doing the same thing globally? And are you guys, is it different for Philippines and what McKinsey is trying to do globally?
Sure. So at least for McKinsey, what we like to call ourselves is we are going to be a cautious follower when it comes to following many of these COVID, I guess, protocols. No? Of course, each country is coming up with their own, and we are by no means going to be the first, to be opening up our offices. Yeah. So in many countries where we operate, travel is not allowed, or at least under very strict controls. We're still working from home, right? Or there's requirements to work from home. And what we've done is, out of an abundance of caution, whatever the local regulations are, we're actually doing above and beyond that. So I can actually say that, we operate in over 60 countries and have over 100 offices. And all of my colleagues and I are actually working from home because we do want to make sure we're really protecting our employees. I guess in that sense, we're lucky because actually we can do, a good portion of our work even while working from home, and it doesn't quite hamper our productivity. In fact, I would actually say we might even be more productive at this point in time. Many of my colleagues are working even harder, and maybe some of you can relate to this, are even working harder as we all work from home. But I do have to say, we might be in the minority of the economies where we operate, just because there's still very much the quote unquote real economy where goods are being produced, goods are being sold, and those are where work from home simply is not tenable.
Thank you, Christine. I like that cautious follower. Edwin, what about ESG? What's the overall strategy been? And have you guys been leveraging any tools to help?
Yes, I really laughed out loud. I can really relate to what Christine said just now about working harder and more productive. Maybe a word or two about ESG. I mean, we are a government agency, and our primary mission is to help Singapore startups and SMEs to grow, right? So to do that, Singapore is a small island, so most of the markets are overseas. So we do have a network of about 36 offices worldwide, mainly in the Asia Pacific, also in Europe and US, Latin America, and so on. And then back home in home base, we have about 800 staff whose main day job actually is to visit companies, talk to the bosses, look at the factories and their outlets. Now, as you can imagine, with the introduction of social distancing measures, circuit breaker rules, and so on, we've had to switch everything to work from home. right? Our global officers, the local staff are all asked to follow the local laws and regulations. But on top of that, to try as far as possible to work from home, telecommute. Our colleagues back in home base, essentially we do conduct some essential services. I mean, those of you from Singapore would know Enterprise Singapore. We have officers who will go out and ensure that the companies are complying with the rules. We have a combination of what we call social distance ambassadors, where we go out and encourage people to follow the rules, to keep apart and so on. So some of these frontline officers, they have to go out, so we make sure they're properly trained, protected, they have necessary protection. The rest of us that are not in the front line, we have to work from home. So thankfully, like South Korea, our internet infrastructure here is quite stable, so there's not been that issue, at least technically. All of us have to start getting used to using tools like Zoom and WebEx and so on. For some of us of a certain vintage, it doesn't come naturally, so we have to learn. And the biggest challenge I think that some of us face really is to manage kids, those of us with families, right? We have to manage kids who are also, because schools are closed, having to learn at home. And it's sometimes quite funny trying to juggle demanding 8-year-old or at the same time trying to convince your boss of a certain thing, all on the internet.
Thank you, Edwin. Mr. Young, is it the same for you guys, either in the Korean Fintech Center or Songang University?
Sorry. The working place I'm working right now is the Fintech Center Korea and the FSC Korea. We are working with the Korean government. Whose goal is to boost up the fintech is a kind of a new sector of the financial market. In other words, it is digital finance. Our organization strategy to overcome this challenge is very much matched with the Korean government policy to foster digital economy and digital industries at this moment. So we are devising many fintech vehicle tools, such as regulatory sandbox, a testbed to motivate innovative digital finance services, or open banking API, digital platform to accelerate the convenient payment and convenient transfer. Is very good for fintech companies and fintech industry. But problem is that fintech is, as you see, the new industry sector, and so the most of the the fintech companies are startup or venture, small and medium-sized enterprise. It is very much negatively influenced by kind of situation of COVID-19 crisis, which is easily in a severe liquidity shortage or the investment shortage in the market. We are now thinking about preparing for a new the fintech fund, the whole the digital fund at this moment.
Maybe
Thank
one.
you, Mr. Jung. I think
one thing,
Mr. Jung and Edwin
Aaron,
both covered.
Oh, sorry. Go on, Aaron.
Go ahead, Christine.
No, I was just going to say question on tools, just on the question of tools, one thing I have observed that's quite interesting is, of course, there's the tools that we use internally, right, within our own company. But at least for all of us who are working from home, the tools to work with other corporates and other clients, right, outside of your organization. I think the main tool, we talked about Zoom, but one that's been an interesting thing to see is just all these chat groups that have been formed, whether it's on, WhatsApp or Messenger or Viber. The number of chat groups that I'm now a part of just to make things happen has been pretty amazing, because I guess in an age of digital and where you're stuck in your own home, that's one of the things that's important to get things going.
Okay, yeah, I think the prevalence of chat now is like a lot more apparent. But I do have a question. I think Mr. Young and Edwin both touched upon the startup economy in their respective markets. I just wanted to get an understanding of what that situation is like in the Philippines.
Yeah. So interestingly, I think in the Philippines, I would say we're, let me start pre-COVID and then I'll talk about what's happened in COVID. So pre-COVID, I think we were really growing, right, ramping up. But I would say among our peers in ASEAN, we were kind of we weren't in the driver's seat, right? Let's put it that way. And I think over the last 24 months, actually, we've seen an acceleration in number of startups being formed, the number of users that are doing or a number of people familiar with fintech, using fintech products, so forth. I think where fintech is now at is two parts. Now, on one hand, there is a big shift or a big push towards digital, particularly on digital payments, e-commerce and so forth. And everyone is feeling that pain, and everyone is talking about how to accelerate. And I know several startups that are also, working even harder during this time frame, just to cope with that demand, right? Helping build the infrastructure of other companies in terms of digital. But at the same time, there are also startups that are actually really impaired during this time frame. I'll think of two, right? So one is, for example, even the delivery startups, which one would think is actually extremely busy during this time. I think we've had some just logistical challenges locally, again, because of these very strict protocols on how you move about. The initial stages actually, you would have expected online commerce to go up. In some places, actually, it went down because people couldn't, yes, they can order online, but the logistics was just impossible to go from, community to community, and they got stopped. And so actually volumes went down. So that's one type of a startup that's kind of been hampered. Now they're resolving that, but in the early days, it was quite tough. And the second type of startups are, of course, not everyone is tech oriented, or it's not their main, I guess, value proposition. And so for those that still have a lot of, manual operations where they need to encode after they get something from the client, I think those actually, naturally have seen quite a decline in activity. So it's a bit bifurcated, I think, is the picture of startups in the Philippines.
Okay, thank you for sharing that, Christine. I think we've talked a bit about the restrictions and its effects. I think I wanted to move on a little bit to the fiscal policy. I think all three of our governments have introduced and implemented substantial fiscal stimulus packages to help with those deeply affected, vulnerable households, SMEs, people operating in the very deeply impacted industries. What has the impact been? What kind of impact have you guys seen from this, and what has the sentiment been towards these policies, Edwin?
Maybe let me first start by recapping what the government has done as far as the fiscal support schemes have been, and then talk a little bit about also how the startups have been reacting and the startup community has been reacting. We, as part of the Singapore government, we have rolled out something like 60 billion Singapore dollars worth of relief packages, primarily because of this COVID-19. And it's only for the second time this century that we've had to sort of tap on the reserves, so to speak, to pay for this. And the philosophy of the support has very much been to look at the sectors, companies in those sectors that have been most affected, make sure that they have the liquidity to survive, and to make sure that they don't fire their people. So the real objective is to make sure jobs are not lost, companies remain viable, to mitigate the situation as far as we can. So some of the schemes are, for example, enhanced working capital loans, right, where we increase our risk share of the loan loss with the banks so that companies can tap on this. There's a job support scheme where the government will fund up to 75% of the payroll of all Singaporean citizens and permanent residents in companies that are employing them in Singapore today. And depending on which sector you're in, the more affected ones will get a higher level of support, 75%. Others will get 50%. Those who are completely unaffected or less affected, rather, will get 25%. And this is for the job support will extend until the duration of the circuit breaker is lifted. I think so far it's fair to say the feedback has generally been positive. I think company bosses and employees understand and appreciate that. But there's also a recognition that this is not tenable. We can't continue to support the economy this way. I mean, it's about 12% of GDP that the government is pumping into the system. So that has to end at some point. And I think what we are seeing, especially in the startup community, is very encouraging, because you see in our ecosystem a lot of incubators, accelerators like yourself, VCs that are stepping forward to make sure some of them is for self-interest, because those with dry capital, dry powder, they'll know that there are bargains to be had when looking at potential investments in companies who are maybe distressed today. But there are other accelerators, incubators who have developed bottoms-up initiatives. For example, a group of incubators have come up with this Google Doc called Seriously spelled SEA, Seriously Awesome People. They know that startups will be forced to let some great talent go, especially tech talent. But I think they also know that there are some growth sectors that are less impacted, like fintechs, AI, those digitalization, e-commerce type companies. These are still hiring. So a simple ground-up initiative like this has allowed, I think, several hundred people who have been let go to find jobs. And there are other co-working spaces. Foundate, one of our partners, they have offered rental relief for their startups, knowing that these guys need help. So I think this combination of government top-down fiscal incentives and bottom-up startup ecosystem support so far has kept most of our startups intact, and it's something that we want to encourage and support as Enterprise Singapore.
Thank you, Edwin. It's very refreshing to hear that even though there's a top-down support, bottom-up, you're also seeing a lot of initiatives to really help those that are affected. Mr. Yeung, what has the impact been like of the fiscal policies in Korea, and what has the sentiment been?
South Korea government has launched a fiscal expansion policy of about 45 trillion won, which is $45 billion through 3 supplementary budget, and also preparing the disaster aid package to cover whole households in the country, some $14 billion. There are some voices concerning about the worsening of the nation's financial situation. But on the other hand, there are some voices that small business owner is collapsing, and also young man unemployment will be more and more critical. So the Korean government agree with that, and also because Korea's public sector debt is not that much high, because it is around 45% of GDP. So at this moment, a majority of public are in relatively good sentiment welcoming the government policies at this moment.
Thank you, Mr. Jung. It's great to hear that both for Singapore and Korea, sentiment has been very good towards the aid they've been receiving. Christine, what's it been like in the Philippines?
Yeah. So perhaps as the only emerging market country, I just realized that now on the panel, look, I would say there's indeed fiscal stimulus that's been given. By our last official count, it was around 1.5% to 2% of GDP, which is around 5 billion. Which again, if you think of how our economy is not necessarily as financially well off as others, that's really sizable. And the focus has actually been a lot on MSMEs in general, not just startups. And similar to Edwin, the priority has been just to ensure that we protect as many livelihoods as we can. So it has come in the form of zero interest loans. For some sectors, it's come in the form of grants. There are discussions on fuel subsidies for the smaller transport players that have been affected. And so there is, I think many are clamoring for more and for bigger numbers, just given the unemployment that we are seeing and the number of companies that have needed to shutter their doors. Now, when it comes specifically to startups, at this point, at least that I'm aware of, I have not yet heard of specific incentives for startups specifically. Of course, they will be entitled anyway to these broader MSME incentives. It's just, the scale of the challenge that we have, right? Just given our hundreds of millions of employees in the MSME sector, I think it's been tough to single out technology. That said, I am aware of conversations that are saying maybe there can be extra incentives provided for firms that are digitizing, right? For firms that are pursuing digital payments. So I think that's an area where the fintechs perhaps, or these analytics companies can capitalize on. But I think the sentiment has been people are clamoring for more. I think the government has really pushed the envelope as much as they can, but more is being requested by the private sector, and perhaps more can be done for the startup community.
Thank you, Christine. I think the commonality here is if we're leveraging technology to really create opportunities, this naturally gives a very good segue here. Because we spent the first part of the panel talking about challenges, I wanted to move a bit to the opportunities that have happened. I think Edwin touched upon this with certain sectors in Singapore. Christine, what opportunities have you been seeing besides the fintech and the digitization or analytics companies that have arisen because of this climate?
Sure. So just from a sector point of view, I think there's 2 or 3 others that we're expecting. Number one is all things health and wellness, of course. So I think vitamins are back on the rise. Anything that boosts your immunity, exercise and such. And we're seeing for retailers, they're starting to talk about how do they incorporate that more in their on their shelf. How do they create, in the malls, these health and wellness spaces? Just because the awareness around this will definitely increase. So that's number one. Number two, somewhat related, is actually sanitation. Whereas, and it's anything from sanitation materials to sanitation services. So I can already imagine, I don't know if Uber is still in vogue with our startup community, but the Uber of sanitation services, right? For sure that's going to happen. Just given everyone wants to sanitize, the trains, the taxis, once a day, twice a day. I think that's, we're also going to see an increase there. And I think the third is anything related to enabling work from home. Now, obviously, there's all the fintech side, but even things like the actual equipment for HR startups that are saying, hey, we can educate and train your teams on how to do work from home, and it will also have implications, for example, on cybersecurity, right? Because now you'll have the banks who have never really allowed working from home now having to grapple with this. So I think that is the third area we're expecting to see a drastic increase in the next coming months.
Thank you, Christine. I know, Edwin, you touched upon this earlier on the panel, but besides these 3, collaboration tools, sanitization, and supplements, what else have you seen in Singapore that's really an opportunity that really can grow?
I think instead of picking sectors and industries that can grow, frankly, government were very careful in trying to say which sectors will grow or not, because we're usually the last to know. What I will touch on instead is maybe talk about how I think these sort of opportunities will be present in all sectors or the entire economy. Because as you started out the webinar, this is a once in a century pandemic, and every company, every sector, even individuals, right, will have to adapt and change. And I think wherever there is these sort of drastic shifts, there will always be winners and losers, and it's about coming up with a process to enable the discovery of these winners, hopefully then bring private capital to invest in them, and to mitigate the downside and to make the transition of the people working in the losers, right, to transfer over. So from an economic planner, economic development perspective, I think that's probably the approach that we would want to take. I just want to mention 2 examples of how this could happen. The first is, of course, is a continuation of what I talked about earlier, this bottom-up initiative. So there are plenty of startup incubators, accelerators, VCs in Singapore that are not waiting for direction from anyone. And just like plug and play, I'm sure you are running hackathons, COVID innovation challenges. How to identify new ideas to allow companies from all across the sector to adapt to this new normal. We are working with them to promote these, right? So I want to give a shout out to our partner in coordinating this, ACE, Action Community for Entrepreneurship. So if anyone's interested, you can check out their dedicated COVID resource page, ace.org.sg/COVID-19. you'll see a list of innovation challenges, hackathons that our ecosystem partners are organizing. And I think startups from all around the world will be welcome to take part in that. The second channel, I think, is in what we are very keen in Singapore to push, and this is the market-led innovation challenges, the open innovation platforms. So the logic is very simple. You need a company or a government that is prepared to pay to solve a problem, right? Pay for a solution to solve a problem. So crystallize that into a problem statement, launch it out, and then try and crowd in the best ideas and solutions from all around the world. Now, this will send a market signal to startups in adjacent sectors, in anywhere that think they have the capability to develop a solution to immediately get quick market validation. And we want to promote this sort of a process as a way for companies and governments to figure out what's the best way to adapt to this new normal, where these opportunities are. They could be in medical technology, in health and wellness, in sanitation, in industrial engineering, anything. Right? But the key is to find a way to match those people with the problems that they are prepared to pay to solve with those who are the solution providers. And my bet is that many of these solution providers will be startups. So if anyone's interested, we have organized some of these innovation calls into our website, Open Innovation Network, right? Just Google it, openinnovationnetwork.sg, one word, and you get a sense of some of the things that we are trying to do in Singapore and the opportunities that we think are there fed back from the industry.
It's really great to hear, Edwin. I think this market-led innovation projects is a very good way to approach it, to quickly really push out solutions in times like these. Mr. Jung, what opportunities have you seen in the Korean market that have arisen due to this climate?
I think a post-corona trend is clearly fast digitalization of economy and whole industries, which is, I think, a transformation into non-face-to-face transaction. Therefore, there will be great opportunities related for industries like online game, online shopping, online finance, online medical care. For instance, sales of Naver and Kakao, which is representative online platform in Korea, growing by 30 or 40% percentage even in Corona age. But I think it is the kind of a sector in current industry. According to report, ratio of digital economy in our GDP is 1/3 of analog economy. So I think a dramatic decrease in analog consumption cannot be covered by some increase in online consumption. So I think we need a new way of thinking. So I think it's all same with every country. So every country government will start to build up a new industry, which means the big investment for a new industry. So I think we need to think about the kind of the innovative new industry investment. I think it's still pretty much related to digital the investment. So as far as I know, the Korea and the China government has announced that they kind of big digital infrastructure investment by government. So I think which is very much related to the big data, AI, 5G, IoT, something like that, which is has a kind of spillover effect into whole industry. I think it is reflected to stock market and the price of venture capital market as well in Korea. So we need to think about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jung. I think what's common here is that in times of crisis, you really see innovation. Innovation is key. And we're seeing this across all three countries that you guys are in and across all the markets in Asia, actually. I think we're coming to the end of the panel. Want to just wrap this up by asking for you guys to share one key insight or takeaway you want to share with the audience at home today. Let's start with Edwin.
Well, I think the key insight, I'm afraid I'm just going to repeat what I said earlier, that this is a challenging situation. It's a gray cloud, but I think in every gray cloud, there are silver linings. I think it's for us in the startup community to figure out what those silver linings are and to make it happen, and not wait for the big companies or the more sort of governments to take the lead in this. I mean, that's the beauty of the startup world. The entrepreneurs a lot more nimble. So please go out there and look for that silver lining. And if you are in Singapore, then come and tap on our ESG support, startup ESG support.
Thank you, Edwin. I really like that. Realistic but hopeful, have to act decisively and quickly but informed. Christine?
Sure. If I can, Aaron, I'll do two things, two insights. I think number one is, let's always remember that this is indeed about lives and livelihoods. So while it might be tough for us, I think always remembering that we are, by staying at home, helping to save lives, I think helps put things in perspective. I think the second thing I will say is, because it is an unprecedented crisis, it does create a lot of discontinuities that we haven't seen at this scale. And for all the entrepreneurs who are out there, I mean, we all know, discontinuity is where we're able to kind of disrupt the big guys and find opportunities to find a need that's not yet filled up by anyone big. So could also create opportunities for all the entrepreneurs.
Thank you, Christine. I like that too. It's about lives, but very optimistic. There is opportunity in chaos, so always be on the lookout for that and try to take advantage of that. Mr. Jung, one takeaway?
I think, great opportunity, starts with, great crisis. So I think it's very high time at this moment. I think, the COVID-19 is not a cyclical issue. I think that is a kind of a structural changing issue. So if we believe that, we have to prepare for new era, the digital and, some innovative technology related to digital. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jung. I really like all three of this are very optimistic. We do have to face the realities of the current situation, but there are opportunities here and it's our job to go out there and actively seek that. So I want to thank you guys again, all three of you, for your time, Christine, Edwin, Mr. Jung. It was very insightful, and thank you for sharing your thoughts. I think I wanted to just wrap this panel up by circling back to how we started off. I think I wanted to just reaffirm our commitment here at Plug and Play by saying that we are really trying to help our ecosystem by sharing as much relevant knowledge as possible so that all of us, no matter what situation we're in, can make informed decisions quickly and act decisively. And the goal is that at the end of the day, COVID-19 will end, and we want to be in a situation where we'll survive and come out of this predicament stronger and better than before. So thank you again, guys.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, all the panelists and the moderator for our previous session. That was very, very insightful.